So let's take a look at some muscles of the arm. And the first muscle that we're going to do is one that is a deeper muscle. It is called the brachialis. It's also a synergist. And when we were talking about what muscles did before, a synergist is a muscle that helps the prime mover in its task. So this muscle, the brachialis, helps the biceps brachii. And again, we have cross joint, and that was one of our key points of muscles, is that for them to function, they must cross a joint. And this particular muscle has its origins on the humerus. It's got two bellies, and one goes on either side of this ridge structure, which is the deltoid tuberosity. That is a structure that the deltoid attaches to. And then the insertion point comes down and inward and attaches across the joint to the ulna. Now, when I said this was a synergist, the way that it helps the next muscle, which is the biceps brachii, is that it prevents rotation. You see, the biceps actually is going to come from the the coracoid process, and there's a little subcoracoid notch here, and it's going to attach to the radius. And this is the insertion point, is this radial tuberosity. And if that were the only muscle that were there, the arm would have a tendency to rotate. So this muscle, which is the biceps brachii, and it's called biceps because it has two bellies, and brachii because it is associated with the arm. So the biceps brachii has two portions, and both portions cross the joint, and it comes up, it overlays the brachialis, actually goes over the top of it, and the lateral head goes up through that area, the intertubercular groove, and its origin then is up here toward the top, having gone through that groove, it attaches to part of the scapula. The second head attaches to the coracoid process. The second belly attaches here and goes upward, and its origin is here, so its insertion is down here. This does actually a couple of things for us. That muscle has an attachment that is a little medial and a little bit, and another one that's a little bit deep, and that allows that muscle to be able to deliver force in all ranges of motion. Okay, our next muscle is actually, it's the trapezius muscle, and it's called the trapezius because it's kind of trapezoidal shaped. You see, it goes from here, which is the superior nuchal line at the base of the skull. It swings over to the top of the scapular spine. It actually, while it attaches here, it starts attachment to the spine at the 7th cervical vertebrae, and it goes down to T12. So it's a very big, broad muscle. And if you go on both sides, you see that it is largely a trapezoidal shape, or kite kind of shape. Now I'm just going to build one side here to give you a sense of it, but it is, again, very, very large. And in fact, I'm going to have to put a couple of pieces here and kind of smooth it all together here. And I know I sound a little bit like Bob Ross with this. Got ourselves a happy little muscle. But one thing to be aware of is this muscle, because it is so big, it has a variety of functions. This is now, if we paired that on the other side, it would have this trapezoidal shape, or kind of look like, you know, the shape of a kite, as it were. Our next muscle is the latissimus dorsi. It is the biggest muscle in the body, and it starts at T7, so naturally it goes underneath the trapezius. I didn't, but so I should have built it first, but we can fix that. So it goes from as an origin from T7 all the way down to L5, and part of the iliac crest, posterior portion. Its insertion point is on the humerus. Let's put that on there, and then we'll see what kind of repairs we can do. So, when you go to the gym and you say you're working on your lats, you're working on a muscle that looks something like that. And actually, I took a moment or two just to clean it up a little bit. So, more like that. Yeah, again, the insertion point being on the humerus. This allows us to pull our arms downward. Extends all the way from T7 to L5, and there's actually a little fascia that goes on down the sacrum that it attaches to as well. But for our purposes, again, this looks fine. Now I get to correct my mistake in terms of putting the trapezius before I did the latissimus dorsi. Unfortunately, this is a relatively easy fix. And there you can see now the relationship between those two muscles. Yeah, as I'm building these, I'm not making them the most beautiful things in the world. I've got some images that I've done from other models that I can show you, but we are getting general sense of what these muscles look like, their location, their origins, and their insertions, and their relationships to one another. Okay, our next muscle is the pectoralis muscle, and between the latissimus dorsi and the pectoralis muscle, that's basically, those two define the boundaries of your armpit. Now, the pectoralis has sternal attachments going down to the sixth costal cartilage. It also has a clavicular attachment that goes on the anterior portion of the medial clavicle, and it attaches or inserts right into the near the intertubercular groove. And it allows us to adduct our arm, or pull it forward, and allows some rotational movement. So I've pressed out a big wad of clay here. Let's see how we can do in terms of putting that guy together. And we're going to, now this is also a massive muscle, and actually there are muscles underneath. This is the pectoralis major, there's a pectoralis minor, and some books will divide this also into a clavicular head and a sternal head, and it actually will extend down to, there is an aponeurosis right through here, which is a connective tissue sheet, where the rectus abdominis attach. So we cut these little extra bits off here. Let's see what we can do. Now, I do kind of wish that I had used a different color here just to make sure that you could distinguish between the tendons of the biceps and the pectoralis muscle. But I think you can get the general idea. Our next muscle is the gluteus minimus, a relatively small muscle. And when you hear a name like minimus or maximus, that tells you that in that same area there is a muscle that does essentially the same thing that is a different size. So if we did not have a gluteus medius and a gluteus maximus, we'd just call this the gluteus muscle. But it attaches, or has its origin at between the inferior and anterior gluteal line, and this is a fairly clearly demarcated line on our models here, and its insertion point is on the greater trochanter. So this, again, relatively small muscle, just sits like that. Now our next muscle is going to be the gluteus medius. It overlays the gluteus minimus. It's also underneath the gluteus maximus. So I'm going to build this in a different color just so everybody can see. But the origin is along the anterior portion of the iliac crest, and it extends down again to the greater trochanter. So as a point of interest, if you're going into nursing, this is the muscle that we largely try to put injections in other than the deltoid. And we shoot for this muscle for a very simple reason. The sciatic nerve comes out through here, and if you were to go straight in along the buttocks,